Oh, okay.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Binkhorsts and Blockbusters. I'm Kate,
And I'm Garrett.
and today we're going to be reviewing Silence of the Lambs.
Yes, this is a 1991 film, so kind of old. This is a good movie. I really enjoy it. Probably saw this one when I was too young to fully understand it, and went back to review it for this. Got some new insights. I'm excited to share.
Yeah, this is a good one, and it's one of those in an era of, I think the 90s had a lot of really good detective true crime movies and films that really have stood the test of time. I think this one still holds up pretty well, especially if you view it as a movie happening in the 90s. So I'm excited to talk more about it.
Awesome. But first, what's on TV?
So I finished season 3 of The Witcher finally. I think we talked about it back in July, when the first part of the season came out. They delayed the second part. Um, I'm not entirely sure why they did that. I mean, it's kind of nice to be able to like binge a few episodes, talk to your friends about it, and then binge a few more. But I'm going to go into some soft spoilers here. So if you don't want to hear anything about it, skip ahead. Garrett always puts the different sections in the description so that you can just skip to the Silence of the Lambs talk. I'm not going to tell you what happens in the thing, but I am going to say, and here's your spoiler warning, skip ahead. I did not like it at all. I thought that the ending and the last few episodes, the three that came out, were really terrible. And I was really disappointed. And I honestly didn't understand what was happening. So, that's my 2 cents. So I remember a few months ago, or whenever we reviewed the first half, I said, I liked it, especially compared to some of the other seasons, but I have reversed course and don't recommend this one if you haven't already started it.
See, this is surprising to me because I only watched, I think, the first couple episodes, but the first episode I thought did a really good job reminding me of a lot of stuff that's happened. So the fact that they somehow lose that element of like being able to catch you up by the end of the season is really weird.
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe the last 3 episodes should have been like 4 or 5, or like what the deal was there, but I really, really, really struggled to figure out who was on whose side, what kind of drama was going on, and then the last episode that had come out, I think it was episode 5. I actually really liked that episode, and I thought that the political intrigue of that was really good. But these last 3 episodes, I couldn't tell you heads or tails of who won, who it did good, who I have no idea. It really got into some muddy waters of character development and politics that just made it nonsensical.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah. Disappointing. I can't say anything good about it really. Like Henry Cavill, attractive, cool. Eh, maybe watch like a supercut of his scenes
Yeah,
on YouTube
because
or something.
yeah, go for that. He's done with this show. This was his last season. One of the Hemsworth brothers, I think, is taking over for his role um, going forward because they're making more of this.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they also are going to pivot to one of the characters being kind of more the focus of the show than the Witcher himself, which, whatever, kind of makes sense. But I think I told you this, and I've told a couple friends, like this is Game of Thrones level politics with CW level writing, and I just could not make heads or tails of any of it.
That that's so disappointing.
Yeah, yeah. It really fell apart there. So sorry, folks.
Well, if you want a better Witcher experience, go play some of the video games.
Yeah, yeah. I think that if you enjoyed this world, if you enjoyed, the characters, go play the video games. Go watch somebody play the video games on Twitch. You'll get more out of it.
Right? Uh, yeah, I gave up on it pretty early on there, so I'm kind of glad I didn't waste more time with it. But sad all the same. Everything's got to fall from grace sometimes.
Ah, there's some shows that do good over multiple seasons. Not many though. I agree.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of like series and film series have had a difficult time going from like the we have the show pre-COVID, and then there's something that they were working on during, and then something that's post-COVID of just like it gets messed up. Um, and I really want to say that this show, something like that has happened because I remember really liking the first season, and that came out just before. Um, but I don't know. I've heard rumors and things, but I don't have the true enough insight to know what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure it'll all come out eventually in interviews and stuff. But yeah, it's a Kate recommends you skip this one.
Okay. Well, I guess that'll take us to our main event, the Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, great movie poster, great art. I love the moths, become like such an emblem of this movie, and it's such a great touch.
Yeah, it's I think it's the thing that really sets our lead Sterling or Starling uh apart from like the other investigators that are on the case because she's found and then immediately understands the implications of finding a moth in this guy's house and how bad that is.
Hmm.
Um, this film was based on a book, and the book
It
came out.
was.
Yes, I think I've read this book.
I have also read this book.
I don't remember much. I think I read this book almost just because I watched the movie. This was
Yeah.
written by Thomas Harris in 1988. So about 10, 11 years later, they started working on the movie. Um, and it was directed by Jonathan Demme, and for a budget of less than $20 million, which even at the time is a pretty small budget. Compared to today's box office, that is nothing. Um, a the modern Disney show productions, those are all in the 200 to $300 million range, even for all their movies. And I know that's a lot bigger, but if you think even back then they could have done a lot with 20 million. Um, this was also one of the first movies that was done with like the permission and cooperation of the FBI, which was interesting. So the shots that are in the training camp in Quantico are real. Those are all real shots of the building. Some of the background extras are people who actually worked for or with or part of the FBI locations that they went to, which is pretty cool. Um, and also, the director was scarred from a interaction they had with the FBI director there at the time, who showed him some unsavory real life criminal stuff. And I don't think that's okay, but I guess when you're getting into this movie, maybe you need to see something like that so you can most accurately portray it.
Yeah, I'm sure that he thought it would be okay. Like I don't imagine they just showed it to him without, asking him. But
Right.
that stuff, when it's real can really take you back. And I think in this movie, as opposed to Jaws, we are getting into a much more gruesome, um, realistic depiction of death and decomposition and those kinds of things that, we haven't really talked about in any of the movies that we've watched for the podcast yet.
Yeah, and this is, especially for the movies we've talked about, is the first that's, the closest to reality. Um, just about everything in this film has happened in some capacity and or will happen in some capacity. Like it's all realistic. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and even in a lot of the elements, I mean, I know Thomas Harris, this is written based on a book, but a lot of the elements of that they're going for that happen in here are related to different cases, different serial killers, different true crime things. So it is certainly plausible like that something like this could happen, and it would be, investigated in a similar way.
yeah. So this movie at the time was incredibly successful, and for something that's a horror movie, I would say it is. It's in that vein. It might be closer to thriller. Um, it's certainly less of like a slasher movie, but uh, for a horror movie, it won some fantastic awards. It became the third film to win the five major categories of the Academy Awards. Before this, the most recent one was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So those awards were for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor and Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot of awards and all really well deserved.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think this film started obviously with a good foundation of having a book to base it off of. It had a good idea, a good foundation. The scenes, the shots, the way the actors perform are all fantastic. And I'm sure if we looked at other films at the time, this one is probably very obviously going to be the best. Yeah, I looked when I was researching this, the highest grossing films of 91, and the number one is Terminator 2, which is great in its own ways, but certainly not as great as Silence of the Lambs. Um,
I think people will get into a fight with you about that, but not me. I agree. Silence of the Lambs is superior.
well, Terminator 2 is the best Terminator movie, but that's not hard to beat.
Yeah, I have to say I really don't like that movie because that's the one with the melty guy.
Yes, that is the one with
Yeah,
the groundbreaking special effects of the melty guy.
yeah, and me as somebody who do I have a superiority, issues with special effects? I do. Yes, I like good special effects. Dated special effects suck and I hate them and they ruin a movie for me. And that movie was just ruined by Melty Guy. And I know it's some people just love that movie. It's not me. I do not love that movie. Silence of the Lambs, love this movie. Hannibal Lecter, Clarice, it's a great, really great characters, and the story is a really phenomenal little thriller.
Our main character in this film is Clarice Starling, and she's played by Jodie Foster. And this is where we get yet another fantastic uh, movie hero. She's a great character. The American Film Institute uh, claimed she is the number six hero. I don't know what metric they're using here, but sure. I think when we talked about Ellen Ripley, I think she was number one for a while.
Are we just talking about women or
I think this list was just all heroes. Let
okay?
me let me go back to the list.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that as women heroes in films go, she is definitely way up there. As
Uh,
is Eleanor Ripley.
The American Film Institute only goes by heroes as people. They don't break it down into gender. However, she is the highest ranked female hero, and then Ripley is just behind her. In between them is Rocky Balboa, who, well,
Okay,
who do you
you
think? Who
say
do you
so.
think? Who do you think the number one hero in all of cinema history is?
Number one hero in all of cinema history. And
Yes,
okay, and Eleanor Ripley, Clarice Starling, and Rocky Balboa are in the top five?
they're in the top 10.
Okay. So, I mean, is it the Terminator? Like,
No, I don't think the
okay.
Terminator. I'm looking. He's
I mean, he's Rocky-esque. I mean, is it Rambo?
no.
Okay, well, that's good.
I'll give you a hint. You've definitely read the book.
Is it Harry Potter?
No,
Okay, that's good. Okay, Aragorn.
no. Okay,
What
okay.
book?
Well, if I tell you the book, it gives it away.
Okay.
We have spent a while on this bit. Uh,
Okay.
it is Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh God.
They are the
Oh,
number
it's
one hero.
ridiculous. What? A lawyer? A lawyer wins this competition?
Oh, well, number two is Indiana Jones.
I mean, Indiana Jones at least saved, artifacts and killed Nazis. What did Atticus Finch do?
Um, Civil rights.
Yeah, I guess. Okay.
We've really derailed from the Silence of the Lambs, but I think
This is
that's
true. Yeah.
I think that's okay because we can use this as an opportunity to talk about how stupid all of these damn lists are and about how
Yeah,
none of it means anything.
these listicles are really dumb. But yeah, to go back to Silence of the Lambs, I mean Jodie Foster, Eleanor Ripley, and I mean I think Lulu Dallas fits in the same kind of like awesome, strong female characters. Um, I'm sure there's some more that'll pop into my mind as we go here. But I think that, a woman who is young and new on the scene and wants to, learn and grow her career. And not only that, but she also wants to solve the case. She wants to get this guy. And I think that's why true crime appeals to so many women in particular. I mean, when we talk about like the true crime phenomenon, you have a whole lot of women sitting around watching documentaries and listening to podcasts, and a lot of them doing amateur sleuthing and, detective work, and even like the people who do the genealogy research in order to try and connect the DNA trees, and to be able to solve some of these cold cases. I think that a lot of that comes from a genuine wish to solve the case and to catch these killers and to, make the world a safer place. Serial killers usually do go after women. Hannibal Lecter seems to not be very discerning about gender, but we are the people that suffer from the serial killers. So,
And tons of other crimes and acts of
oh yeah,
violence. Yeah.
yeah, 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 kidnapping and sex crimes and all of that. And I think that, having her, and I can't really think of, because I'm not a huge true crime movie genre person. A lot of these movies become very dated very quickly. The ones
Yeah.
that I can think of off the top of my head are like the Alex Cross movies. Like, they become dated as we have better understanding of technology, or just the way that the crimes are solved. But this movie doesn't, in a totally different way. I think that it helps that it's set in a time before, like computers become, the absolute you know, uh, way to solve a crime. And I think that we see that in the scene where she takes the moth to the bug guys at, university, and like they talk to her about it and they do the research, and you're really hands-on with, getting to the bottom of that question of what kind of moth is this? What the heck?
Yeah, there's some allusions to the technology that they have being able to solve the crime. I think they talk about the the locations of the bodies and like, oh well, our analysis would have found if it was like a pattern or truly random and something like that. But the like investigation that she does is used so well to highlight her skills as, as the hero, as the investigator, as the FBI agent, that really make us go, yeah, this is somebody who is deserving of all the praise that they've been getting from Jack Crawford, one of her mentors at the FBI, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it I think the other thing is that doing that kind of like hands-on, like with the map on the table and the note taking, and even the microfiche, it's easier for the viewer to understand the research that's happening than it is to put somebody in front of a computer. And I think that that's where a lot of later true crime stuff fails, is that, unless, like, a lot of stuff happens in the lab, a lot of stuff is just waiting around for results to come in. Watching somebody research stuff on Wikipedia is not interesting to watch. And I think that's one of the reasons why this one is so good.
Yeah, because it's every step of the investigation is like a new challenge. It's a new place or a new obstacle to overcome. Even
Hmm.
her just having to open the door at the self-storage place becomes like a way of showing like force and resourcefulness and of progressing the investigation by yourself. Whereas, they in a modern movie, it might just be looking for emails or looking through like old data or trying to like unscramble Dr. Lecter's encrypted notes, could be something like that. But here it's
Yeah.
everything's a lot more tactile.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, then it allows us to go to, a lot of different locations. And as you may know from listening to the podcast, I am somebody who likes a limited number of sets, and, having like really clear cut, locations. But in this movie, having the different sets allows the investigation to go through, different walks of life. Like the storage unit is such a great example of like this conglomeration of stuff, and she has to like kind of pick through that to figure out the clues. And I also think this movie does a really good job of not including a lot of superfluous stuff that doesn't matter, because all of those things in that storage unit really do matter, and they're all about the person that that belong to, and Hannibal Lecter, and all of that. And similarly, when we go to the first girl who went missing, her house, and you go through her bedroom, and you see all of that stuff is very important, and it all, it shapes what we think of this victim as a person. And we also learn that she was a seamstress, and she did those things, and those are the clues that we needed to propel the plot forward. And I think in this way, the movie it does such a good job of presenting, all the clues to solve the mystery. And you have to, the lens that it focuses on allows you, the viewer, to do that. But also, it's like the perspective, it's like you're front everything is shot from the perspective of the investigator. You're looking at all of these little things as if they're important, and many of them are, to give you the picture.
Yeah, there's an excellent shot where Hannibal Lecter's like locked up in his straitjacket, and we keep getting this like glimpse of a pen that's on the table while uh, the doctor man is talking down to him, and then later
Hmm.
he can't find his pen, and it's like, okay, we're reminded of something. We know that's important. We know it's missing now. What's it gonna do? And then later he uses that to pick his handcuffs, and that's one of the, investigative things that we figured out that should have been a red flag to the doctor, but he didn't have the he's not smart enough to have made those observations. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also the kind of thing that then, stands up to a lot of rewatching because all the sets were decorated so well, you're able to look at the different items and pick up new things over time as you watch it again and again.
yeah, you start to notice because our villains in this film, they have very different tastes, very different styles. And the time you spend in Dr. Lecter's cell, you start to see his appreciation for the arts of architecture, of his own like artistic merit. And when he gets transferred, you see that again, but this time with the music, with drawing a new picture, things like that. And then when we're in the basement, the grime, the weird clothes and symbols and all sorts of weird shit, you start to get a lot more into the head of our main villain.
Hmm.
So this film has many themes, I would say. There's a lot that it's trying to communicate with you, but I think the biggest one that's really apparent that everyone can identify when they watch this film is how much of a man's world this is and how out of place Clarice is in all of it. So this is a scene from the opening of the movie where she has gone out and done some exercise on the FBI training track, and she joins, assumingly, the rest of her peers in an elevator. And she's framed in this shot as being so small, so different, even in the outfit, where she's looking, what she's doing, where her mind's at. And I think this does a really excellent job of immediately telling you how out of place she is in this world that she has to explore and navigate to solve the crime.
Yeah, yeah, and this image in particular, like the men are all a foot taller than her. They're all wearing, polos where while she's, small and wearing a sweatshirt. It really does emphasize the difference. And there's a similar scene when they go to the autopsy and there's just a room full of cops, and she's there and she's small, and the director, or yeah, Crawford makes a reference that he doesn't want to talk to the sheriff in front of a lady, when really he didn't want to talk to the sheriff in front of all of those people. So using he this movie is also very much about her being used as a tool by the FBI, by Hannibal Lecter, not necessarily by Wild Bill, um and as a tool to make things happen, because like Crawford uses her to get to Hannibal Lecter. He wouldn't have told those kinds of things to a guy.
Yeah, I think there's a line where um, so there is a line where Lecter suspects that maybe Jack Crawford is using Starling and will help advance her career in exchange for other favors. Um, but I think there's a line where somebody says like, "Oh, you might fulfill Lecter's appetite," and she does, but it's far more intellectual because he's finally had someone interesting to talk to. Uh,
Yeah, and he found, picking apart her story to be interesting. I found that like when Lecter, talks to her and he says that he looks at her and he knows she's from West Virginia and from a poor background, and he assumes that she must, be part of a mining town, or her family must be miners, but it turns out her dad was a cop, and so he doesn't know everything about her, but he knows a lot. And I think that he finds it interesting to pick apart, her history, and how she got to that place. And I mean, it's clear, she was a cop, and her dad was a cop in a small town, and she wanted to grow up and not be a cop, because as you can see, she was not a, well-respected person in the room full of cops. They looked down on her. But this idea that maybe at the FBI solving, real crimes, that she could do good for the world.
Absolutely. One thing that I also noticed was interesting is just about every man she interacts with takes some form of initiative in asking her out to some degree. Dr. Chilton does when she goes to the mental hospital where Dr. Lecter's being stored. She gets ogled at by some joggers. Um, the
Well,
the
there's
bug,
Miggs in his cell, the
yeah,
the crazy guy.
yeah, that's very deliberate sexual assault. Very, very disgusting. The bug nerds, they even ask her out, and they're bug nerds. Um, and there's some implication that like because Lecter and her have a sensual hand touch in the later cell scenes when he's moved, that gives an indication of like their or potentially his interest in her, but I don't think there's much else to like explain that.
Yeah, I mean that was a, an intimate moment, and I think that, not all advances, romantic or sexual, are, physical or, outright body. I think that, him trying to pick at her brain in a way that, probably, she's probably in her mid to late 20s. Like, she'd probably never told the story about the lambs to anybody before. And so, like, it's an incredibly intimate story about her past and a very emotionally vulnerable part of her life. And I think Lecter using that to get close to her, to create that intimacy between them, it certainly, signals a connection. And then too, like his conversation with her at the very end of the film, again, suggests that very intimate connection, but it's very different from the outright, like, oh, don't you want to go out to, someplace in Baltimore with a creepy doctor?
Yeah, and I think that's why of all the characters, she's more susceptible to working with him. Is because there's still like a level of respect between them, which
Mm-hmm.
isn't
Yeah.
seen in most of the others. Even with Crawford, she feels like she's always like outside or one step behind or not a part of like the full investigation. Um, Even when she calls him up and says, "Oh, I figured out what he's doing. He's making this suit." He's like, "Oh yeah, we're already on our way. You've done some great work." And she's like, "Oh, well, I'll drive the 500 miles to Chicago." And he's just like, no, you don't need to do that. You'll be remembered for helping solve this case. And it's like it's just such a letdown. Like she definitely doesn't feel respected by him at all.
Yeah, especially not in that moment. And you can understand that, he, because he thinks that he's right and he thinks that they've gotten the guy, that, it's okay. And but obviously he was wrong. And I think that when he realizes how wrong they were later on and realizes that she's in danger, like, I think that you can tell in the movie that he cares, and he's like, "Oh no, I've made a mistake." Um Yeah. And I don't remember if in the book or not they Crawford and her had a more romantic relationship. But I think that while they do insinuate that, I think that I would prefer to read it as a, mentor-mentee relationship. But I don't recall how that went. And I mean, this is the 80s and the 90s, not the 2023s where, this relationship would need to be very much more platonic for sure in this, working relationship.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember. I don't even remember if he's in the sequel to this film, um, or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you would hope that after she catches it, she solves the crime, she's a serial killer, that it would only that she would have more power, just in general, and command more presence. Because I think that's in another scene where she's trying to get the police officers out of the autopsy room. Like she raises her voice, gets their attention, says, "Hey, please leave," and then none of them do until she says it again. And it's you would think that later, that after this, she would have the presence and the reputation to command and demand some of the respect that nobody's given her. Um,
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, at this point she is still a trainee, so not all of this is because she's a woman. How the police do treat her is because she's a woman. And I also thought that that little speech that she gave about the woman and like how we're going to take care of her now and thanking them for doing that, I think that that came from a place of, being from the Midwest and knowing the local cops because she grew up with them and knowing how they would feel about, because this woman was probably, I guess the woman had been kidnapped elsewhere and found there. So she probably didn't have a local connection, like actual
right,
connection.
right.
But I mean, all of those cops are seeing their cousin or their sister or something in that woman. They're not like they can relate to her in a way that, needs to be, I guess, addressed and respected, especially when you have the big, tough FBI coming in and, disrupting the scene, which we know from reading about true crime and all kinds of media about true crime, is that when the FBI comes in, there's usually some kind of, conflict between the FBI and the locals because the locals want to, keep jurisdiction or whatever, even though they might be over their head and it might be something way bigger than them.
Yeah, in some ways, in those sort of stories, it makes it seem like, well, the local law enforcement have failed in their duty. And we all know that police have huge egos, and being told you failed and you're being usurped by the federal government is, you know, not the thing you want to hear, and not something you want to have to face when, the rest of your small town starts to question your, abilities to keep them safe.
Hmm. Yeah.
We don't necessarily see that in this film, but I've definitely seen that in other movies and
Yeah,
shows.
yeah, and I think they do a good job of not letting that become a plot point in that scene. The way that scene was written, they stopped that from happening. And I think that that's a product too of them. So this movie, begins when they're, you know, 6 or 7 murders into a serial killer.
Yeah,
So, we're approaching it where so much has already happened, that we get caught up as Clarice gets caught up.
yeah, because she's not in on the ground floor.
Yeah, because she's in training, and Crawford and whoever else are actually the ones working on it.
Yeah. So let's explain why we have Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter in this movie. So Hannibal Lecter is played by Anthony Hopkins, and they are an already incarcerated serial killer who would eat their victims. Um, prior to their arrest, they were an esteemed psychologist or psychiatrist, one of the two. Um, and they used their position of power to, well, in a later film, we realize the full extent, but to maim, influence, and ingest their patients. Um, and they're brought into this film to kind of act like a consultant in trying to uncover who Buffalo Bill is. And we later learn that he's met the guy, and he knows who it is, and he's withheld that information.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is part of a I think a real thing that happened in the 80s, this is the late 70s and the 80s, when serial killers um, became a lot more prominent and problematic in culture, where the FBI did go in and try to interview a lot of serial killers in order to get a better understanding of, why they did what they did, how they got away with it, and all those kinds of things. And I think the Netflix show Manhunter is about the birth of the FBI serial killer profiling units, um, which has been since canceled because Netflix is a great place.
Mindhunter.
Mindhunter. What did I say? Manhunter?
Manhunter.
Yeah, Mindhunter. Yeah, it's a very good show. You should watch it even if it has been canceled.
Yes.
So yeah, and I think Hannibal being this guy is so different from all the other serial killers that, we come across in the media.
Yeah, so at the time, you were looking at the serial killers being, your Jeffrey Dahmers, your Ed Geins, people who are merciless, who are incredibly violent, from an outsider perspective, simple-minded, crazy, just on drugs. But we have Dr. Lecter, who stands completely opposite of that. He's a man of culture, of taste, of some kind of integrity. He has a great love for the arts. He's an artistic person. He's well put together. He's well dressed. He's a very powerful presence.
Hmm. Yeah. And it is a great contrast to even just the room he's in, which is, in this basement at this, falling apart psychiatric hospital in Baltimore. I love one of the shots of the building as Clarice is getting into her car. You can see that one of the windows is just broken in this place because it's clear they just filmed this at kind of like an abandoned warehouse situation rather than, find something that was even remotely, functioning as a building.
You make do. You only have 20 million.
Well, and it works,
Yeah.
it works. And I just thought that was like a nice, like a funny little thing to notice that, yeah, even if this was a falling apart psychiatric institution, their windows probably would have at least been boarded up.
Mhm.
But yeah, and Hannibal is such a compelling character. He has such a presence and just a way about him that makes you be interested in him, that makes you be sympathetic to him, especially as he's being tortured by the people that live in the cells next to him, and the creepy doctor at the psychiatric ward. I mean, and later on, when he's being used, you feel kind of bad for him for being used, but at the same time, he's withholding information, and yeah,
So I
and he
think,
eats people.
yeah, he is evil. Um, so I think up until a certain part of the movie, you don't, we as viewers don't quite understand how violent or dangerous he is. We're notified at one point when we see him that at some point he broke a woman's jaw and like ate her tongue off her face while he was getting an EKG or some other procedure done. So we've heard about it, but we don't see. It's not until later in the film when he escapes from prison that we see like how gruesome he is of cutting off another man's face and wearing that and stringing up another one like he's a party ornament. Like up until then, we're very much on the side of yeah, this guy is being imprisoned in pretty inhumane conditions, and he seems pretty normal. Like what's the deal?
Well, he does have this creepy aura about him, but you know.
Yeah, so he doesn't blink, which is really weird, and Anthony Hopkins went on record and said his like demeanor wasn't influenced by Charles Manson's like, stoic and unblinking demeanor. So, that's nice, but it's still immensely uncomfortable.
Hmm. Well, and I think this is compounded too by the way that a lot of the scenes in the movie are shot, in that the character who is speaking and looking directly at the camera. And so, the camera is straight on him, and you're looking into his unblinking eyes and listening to what he's saying in this smooth voice. So, it just gives you just such a creepy, creepy vibe. But a lot of the other characters are filmed in that same way, and it presents like it gives Clarice a air of legitimacy in her questions, and but also intimacy when she's telling the lamb story. So I just think that the way it was filmed, those scenes in particular, was a really nice touch.
Yeah, I because you told me about it when you were viewing it, how often there are like those close-ups on people, and I really didn't realize it until I was rewatching it and saw just how many times we have, the actor or actress taking up the full screen with just their presence, and I think that that really helped convey a lot more emotion because we
Hmm.
can we can read so much into, a person's mood and psyche by just looking at them, seeing their face and how they move. And I think both um, Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins are really great at giving those looks.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And then the other element is that when they would go back and forth between the shots of the people talking, it created a momentum in them solving the, the mystery.
Yeah, because it always seemed at the end of the conversations, the most critical piece of information is shared, and then they have to leave. They're pushed away or dragged out, or something else happens. Um,
Hmm.
that forces them to go, okay, I need to evaluate the most important things of this situation, and then the next scene is something of lower tension, and they're reflecting on what has just happened, and I think that really helps us um, be a part of that momentum and to be able to go, okay, we're out of that scene, we're out of the basement, we're not with him anymore. Well, what the hell just happened? So it's interesting in several ways, his character, but he's also declared in cinema as like this colossal, this huge villain, and he's not even the villain of this movie. That's our next character. And I think that's so interesting how if you ask somebody who, only seen this film once or saw it a long time ago, they'd probably tell you, yeah, this is the villain of the movie. That there's not this completely other case and someone else that's at large that's, causing a lot of waves. Um, and then in the sequels and prequels to the movie, Hannibal takes a center stage in all of it, uh, as being, so much of a bigger main character. I think most of that is down to Anthony Hopkins' performance.
Hmm. Yeah, it is such an excellent performance.
Um, so we're all very lucky that Anthony Hopkins uh, did the Hannibal Lecter performance. But now let's talk about some people who could have been in his place. Uh, some of these are more funny than others. Uh, Other actors that were considered or auditioned include Al Pacino, uh,
Ugh.
Robert De Niro,
Okay.
Dustin Hoffman,
Hmm.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Maybe.
I think out of any of them that we have listed, I think he has the best shot.
Yeah, of at least creating a personality. I think it would be different from this Hannibal, but it could have been a different Hannibal that would have been uniquely interesting as well.
Yes. And also Forrest Whitaker.
No.
Yeah. I think in oh sorry, I forgot to mention the role was originally offered to Sean Connery, which would have been a very, I think, a weird thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it would not be as creepy. I think that Sean Connery, the psychiatrist playing this person, would have been way more like the professor in the tweed jacket
Mhm.
situation.
Yes.
Especially because I think he would have done it very serious as opposed to his kind of like bumbling professor that he plays in Indiana Jones 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I don't think that it would have been, yeah, it would not have been good.
Yeah. So previously, this role was played by Brian Cox in Manhunter 1986, and that was based on Red Dragon, which was the first movie in the series. So I guess in some ways, this is the first reboot of the Hannibal series, which is weird. We'll talk a little bit later about the other things to come from it. Um, but
Well,
yeah,
and I
I
think
go
Brian
ahead.
Cox, works as a Hannibal as well. And it's a different way, it's a different Hannibal, but it definitely works in a way that I don't think Sean Connery would have.
Right. Yeah, and I really can't see either Al Pacino or Robert De Niro delivering a good enough performance to really like catapult this movie to what it is.
And not in
Um,
1991 because it would be impossible to separate that person
yes.
from, yeah, from The Godfather. Just
Yeah,
just impossible.
yeah, it would be just so difficult to not see them as gangsters, just down
Hmm.
there. Like, very weird. And in some ways, that's unfortunate that actors get typecasted into those things. But in other ways, that means that other people who at the time Anthony Hopkins wasn't as big of a star, have the ability to go out and get these roles that transform their careers.
Yeah.
So now I think we can talk about the real villain of our film, the very
Yeah.
strange Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, and I find this so I it it's interesting to talk about this in the 2023 moment because we have a perhaps trans person that Hannibal Lecter goes, who is a psychologist, says he wants to be trans, but he's not, and he's probably been denied all these surgeries, and that's leading Clarice down to the idea that this guy is trying to become a woman by making a meat suit, which is terrible. Um, so it's interesting to think about the psychology and how that would it be different today.
Yes,
Um,
so I read a little bit about this because I do think this is a controversial topic, and the LGBT community at the time was like, this is an absolutely terrible way to portray any member of our community of being like, this deranged person who's going around killing people. And the response by the director was something along the lines of, it was never our intention to make this person someone who was trans. It was to make this person someone who hated being themselves so much that they wanted to be the complete opposite, and to do that was to be the woman in the suit. And I
Hmm.
don't think that's necessarily communicated that well.
Yeah, I do think it could have been communicated better. I do think, but I do think there are some lines in the movie that try to get that point across.
Yes.
I wish that they had been delivered in a better way, or but again, this is 1991. Our understanding of trans psychology is, completely and totally different now. Um, so there's that. I mean, I also think that, in the grand scheme of, horrifying things that serial killers have done, you have like Ed Gein, who made furniture out of human skin. You have the guy who, killed women and then posed them and took pictures of them wearing shoes and then kept their shoes. So in the like high profile serial, and then there's Jeffrey Dahmer, who kidnapped, gays in the area who were a, marginalized community that nobody cared if they went missing, and then ate them. So we have all of these like horrifying serial killers that are in the news that people know about, that people can imagine that this guy is just one of them in a long
Hmm.
string of guys who do terrible things.
Yeah.
Because they take the elements from several different serial killers in order to make this guy. And I mean, the meat suit trope is one that's in, horror movies going back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. Yeah. Of wearing another person's skin. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really what I talked about at the beginning about making it realistic, about making it so this was somebody that, in your mind and even in our minds now and at the times, you could see as being a real villain out there. There's nothing too like hokey or a master plan about it. This isn't like Seven where the killer's trying to send a message. This is just acts of violence to propel this guy's goal. Um,
Yeah. Well, and like the serial killer with the shoes. And I have been thinking about this since I watched Mindhunter. Is that, had he been alive in 2023 and had access to, psychologists and counseling, but also just pornography on a more widely available scale. And, he could have gone to a store or ordered women's shoes online, in 2023. And had he had access to those things, maybe he wouldn't have committed all those crimes. Like, if Wild Bill had access to better psychology, better understanding of himself, maybe even just some medications, he wouldn't necessarily have done this stuff and gone down this road.
this is all very true, or potentially true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he is an imaginary character. This didn't really happen. So this
Yeah,
is all
there
incredibly fantasy, speculation.
there wouldn't be much of a movie if all the villains got the psychiatric help they needed.
Well, I think we would still have Hannibal Lecter though, because he was a psychiatrist.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even in the Hannibal TV show, he has a psychiatrist of his own. But whether or not he actually uses it, I think he ends up using her in many ways. But
Yeah.
it's the idea. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's like The Sopranos is all about the, going and seeing the shrink, but if you don't tell your shrink the things that are really bothering you, then how much can they really help you?
yeah,
And obviously, Hannibal's not going around telling everybody that he has intense cravings for human brain.
yeah, that's very true. Because you get locked up for saying things like that.
Hmm. But I also like thinking about that is that they don't allude to, other than, like Hannibal being a cannibal and him biting off that face, they really don't allude to how he was caught or many of his other crimes, just that he was a psychiatrist and he destroyed a lot of his records. Um, even the when he says, "Oh, the head in a jar of Moffat," that wasn't, I didn't do that. The head came to me that way.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so we have very little understanding of the things that Hannibal actually did, but we do have a great understanding of who he is.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that is used to paint the picture of him of being a victim of somebody you want to see not necessarily succeed, but whose future you want to see play out is because we don't understand how evil he is.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of yeah, yeah, a lot of just we don't know, a lot of mystery behind him, which is what makes him so interesting.
Hmm.
Um, so I had a thought while watching this of a little bit of a parallel between Hannibal Lecter and Catherine, who is the woman at the bottom of the well that Buffalo Bill is preying upon next. Um, so we get several shots of them in their respective cells, and both of them are like these dingy underground things with the stone bricks behind them, and I think that's very deliberate to show kind of just like the prisoner's dilemma of being trapped in these places. And in some ways, our prison system is just as bad as keeping somebody in a hole at the bottom of the well. Uh, just an interesting parallel that I think that was made very deliberately to get you to when we first see our victim at the bottom, to get your mind prepared to make the same connection to Lecter.
Yeah, I agree. And the settings of both the psychiatry, prison, and then the Bill's house and that basement are incredibly well designed.
I think we have another excellent shot uh, in the pit in the well of when he lowers down like a basket and has like a light attached to it. And we learn earlier during the autopsy scene that the victim had like lots of dirt and stuff under their nails, and they were probably like scratching at something or doing something like that, digging. And when we see the light come up, we see all these like scratchy and blood marks from where the previous victims had like tried to climb up the well, and that causes Catherine there at the bottom to just start screaming in horror as she starts to really understand the situation that she's in. Um,
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
and it's subtle. It's not a very deliberate thing, but it's definitely something that adds to like what we talked about in Alien. The you see step two, now envision step one. Envision what
Hmm.
caused that, and that's where a lot of the horror comes from.
Yeah. Well, and this movie, while it's not an incredibly gory film, it does give you gore in low doses for very brief periods of time. And I also think that's a really nice technique to like flash the gore at us so that, we see it and we're freaked out, but we're not like overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, and yeah, this is a note that I have in our next slide. But in 2017, this movie was reevaluated in the UK for its rating, and they took it down from what is there R to a PG-13 um, rating because we've just become so desensitized to the type of violence that's shown here. A lot of the like really gruesome things, like I think the most gruesome thing is probably the autopsy. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
we
the autopsy is pretty bad and it's, yeah, go
but
on.
if you keep up with what's on TV, it's like there were 1,000 different top procedural shows where they were showing victims on a slab every week, whether that was CSI, NCIS, Bones, um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the stuff
All
that's
the
in
variations.
this movie is no worse than what would be in a CSI episode on 8 p.m. on CBS. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and like there's some other stuff. There's, more explicit nudity, a lot of swearing, things like that that I think could realistically keep it at a high rating, or a higher rating. But when it comes to like just if this was made today, if we go ahead and we make Silence of the Lambs, the well is going to be full of blood and muck. When
Bones.
Bones, when Dr. Lecter, we're gonna watch him peel the guy's face off and put it on his own.
We're
We're
probably going to see him convince Miggs to swallow his own tongue.
Yeah, and watch that happen in real time. Uh, what other horrible things happen that we'll definitely get to see?
I mean, see Buffalo Bill skinning somebody, maybe even sewing the meat suit.
Yeah, while they're alive, definitely. Everything would be pushed up to a 10 because that's what the modern horror or like thriller movie wants to be now. Whereas I think this film just exceeds so much in its subtlety of making sure those things and the thoughts are in your mind that
Hmm.
it's not so outwardly violent.
Yeah, it's closer to Jaws in the way that we just have to imagine what the, girl who got eaten by the shark looks like than, the new Resident Evil, which I think is the most horrifying movie I've watched in the last 10 years. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, because this is in a similar way to Jaws. Like we're able to have so many great moments with our characters and learn so much about them and experience their personalities just because they're not constantly like running or fighting or doing action things or we're not just being overwhelmed with blood splatters and gore and effects like that. We're able to hold on to people and see them like react realistically. Like I think it says a lot during the autopsy scene that Clarice is like almost timid, like she's almost whispering into the um, tape recorder because she is scared. She's out of her element. This is probably the first time she's seen this in person, and she's starting to realize the true danger of what she's up against. And then in the final scenes where she's up against Buffalo Bill in the darkness underground and she's panicking, we can see that in her face. If we had more scenes of blood, guts, and all that kind of shit, we wouldn't get those excellent moments.
That's for sure. Yeah, they focused, and I guess this is why it is closer to a thriller than a horror movie, because they're focusing on the emotions of the characters rather than the horror of the situation.
Yeah, yet it strikes such an excellent balance. I think some criminal movies like this are far more thriller and less horror, but contain, just as horrifying thoughts and ideas. But I think this film does a good job at instilling you with dread of of because there's the ticking clock of whether or not the FBI catches this guy before the woman dies, or whether or not Lecter starts to come after Clarice or someone else.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's similar to like Lecter's escape, was very much all about timing and like the can they catch him before he gets out? How is he gonna get out? That kind of a mystery.
Yeah, and that's such an excellent, scene that highlights not only his like just gruesome and violent nature, but also his intelligence of where and how he's staging the bodies, how he gets himself out, knowing that he'll get out before they finish clearing the building. Um, and how he seems to have known his plan since the moment he picked up the pen. And he
Hmm.
needed that one piece. He was like, I know I'm going to be in handcuffs, and then it can it can go. Um, there's a scene right before that all kicks off where he's, dancing in the corner to music, and it's like he's conducting his orchestra. He's ready to see all the pieces fall into place. Um, oh, so we can
Yeah.
also talk about the music. That's one last thing we have to talk about.
Mm. Yes. Goodbye Horses. Goodbye Horses. I love this song. But yeah, it has a certain connotation to it now.
Yeah, I can think of at least two parodies where that song is used to mimic this scene specifically. And the rest of the movie, I think there's only two other songs that aren't, completely orchestral. The
Hmm.
music was done by, well, you know this. You told me about it.
Yeah, it was done by Howard Shore, who I recognized immediately as the guy who did the music for Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
So, fantastic music. And I think that, it as opposed to some other movies in the 90s, because music kind of got out of hand in some movies, and became like, and I'm thinking about The Usual Suspects as a great example, where the music just it was over the top, so it took away from what was going on. To just for me, I'm
yeah,
sure that other people feel differently, but for me, it's just too dramatic. But in this movie, it's all very subtle. It all works to propel the plot forward. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that, like, if you're watching Silence of the Lambs, you might not notice the music at all, other
yeah,
than Goodbye Horses. You're going to notice that. But you're not going to notice it at all. And how important that is, that we have composers and musicians who are working on these kinds of things to create these subtle musical effects that aren't over the top and don't take away from the film and just add to it.
yeah. I think in several places the music just helps in the momentum. There at the beginning, it's all orchestral, but there at the beginning, it's a little bit more chaotic but mysterious because we're in the woods and Clarice is running and we don't quite understand why, but she's in training and the music kind of gets a little bit more put together because we understand the context. And there are many scenes in this movie where something like that happens, and
Hmm.
it really just helps you keep pace. So what did we learn?
We learned that some cops are good.
If you catch the bad guy, you've done well.
Yeah,
That should be the goal. To catch
yeah,
these real wacko sons of bitches.
yeah. And that good detective work is difficult, and it's about solving a puzzle. And um, yeah.
Yep, because Clarice would never have gotten the opportunity to solve this crime had she not been able to solve the puzzle Dr. Lecter gave to her about Miss Moffat in the self-storage. Um,
Hmm.
and what a great little puzzle that was. And I completely forgot about that from, the last time I watched this movie. But if you're good at what you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, while we have a lot of discourse about cops being bad, and there are a lot of shitty cops out there. I mean,
Oh
we
yeah,
just had another shooting in Philadelphia where a cop shot somebody without any reason. I do
right.
think that, there are instances where, like Clarice's dad, you know, he's a small town cop going into to stop a burglary, and he gets killed. Maybe he was a strong member of his community and was able to do good things and be a mentor and, keep that community, in a lawful and well way. Sure, maybe. And I do think it's good to remember that some of those people do have are doing it for the right reasons, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
And I think
sometimes.
Clarice, and these detectives who are trying to find these, awful serial killers, that's what they're trying to do.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of guts, a lot of a mind, a lot of intelligence needed to go after somebody like this. So Silence of the Lambs left behind quite a legacy. It was a pretty successful series of books that only got more successful. Created a sequel, Hannibal, that the director and Jodie Foster didn't really want to return for because it was getting more violent. Um, and in that one, I think there's a lot more deliberate gore. Uh, Anthony Hopkins returns and eats a part of Ray Liotta's brain, which is pretty wild, but that's all right. Um, there's Gary Oldman's in that one. It's directed by Ridley Scott, who's another director we've talked about before. Um, even later than that, in 2002, uh, Edward Norton was a part of, and Ray Fiennes were a part of a remake of Manhunter, Red Dragon, which is the first book in the series. And then Anthony Hopkins didn't return for Hannibal Rising, which is another film in the series. There was also a television series called Hannibal that starred Mads Mikkelsen. And I remember watching that. I remember it taking a long time, but I remember watching it. Um, and I think there's specifically now a show about Clarice, which is also interesting.
Hmm, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting how, big and important the true crime genre is in film and television and pop culture. It's interesting that we humans find these stories about serial killers, both real and imagined, to be so compelling, even though they are so horrifying. And I think the psychology into that is interesting.
yeah. I think be, because I read something that thought that this movie helped propel that idea of uh, these monsters being deep, being multifaceted, having compelling character or whatever to them. Like there's certainly something interesting about the character of Hannibal Lecter, and a lot of that is due to his performance. But another part of that is due to what he does in that performance. And in many ways, Buffalo Bill is just as interesting. And then to be able to separate that and go, well, the people that they're based on, therefore, are also probably interesting. So you do some research and you learn about these, crazy people that are out there. And in some ways, it's bad because we're giving them the attention that in many ways they crave by doing these things. But no doubt films like Silence of the Lambs have inspired people to go on to want to try to solve these crimes and to be interested in, becoming Clarice.
Yeah, that is certainly possible that people find this kind of detective work to be compelling, and that's why they go into law enforcement. And I think that's certainly a noble idea, because we do have so many people who do really bad things and who do need to get caught. I recently was listening to a podcast about Jeffrey Epstein and all the terrible things that he did, and like they were very well covered up, or at least the alleged things that he did that he wasn't convicted for. um so yeah, I mean we need people who are willing to stay up all night trying to figure out these cases and to catch the bad guys.
Yeah, because that makes our world a better and safer place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all we really want, right? We want safety, we want security. We want to know our friends and family are going to be safe, and should they not be, that they're avenged in some way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the other thing is that if we had better mental health care and better, social services, you know, a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
these people wouldn't have done these things. So there's
yeah,
that.
absolutely. Our society creates a lot of the problems that set these people over the edge,
Hmm.
or create them entirely in the first place.
Hmm.
So, I guess that's what we learned today. Go out
Yeah.
and make the world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Go see a psychiatrist, psychologist, get the mental help if you can. Tell your politicians that we need better social services, Medicare for all those kinds of things that will end up actually preventing serial killers from being born.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
But overall, fantastic film. I love this one. It's creepy. It's well paced. The music's great. The acting's amazing. The filmography is fantastic. The story is incredible. Um, two thumbs up for me.
Yeah, deserving of all the praise, all the awards, its legacy. Maybe not deserving of some of the less great tie-ins, but deserving of its place on our blockbuster Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
Well, we thank everybody for watching. We're rapidly increasing our views, and that's great. And want to thank you for liking and commenting and being engaged. If you have any recommendations for films you would like to see us talk about, then put them in the comments below, and we'll probably do them.
Yeah.
It might take a while as we're ramping up for something special here, but well, we're having fun doing this, so it'll probably keep going for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, and we like good movies. So give us your recommendations for good movies we want to watch and review and talk about.
Okay.
Okie dokes. Well, have a good night, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks.